Welcome into the podcast. It's draft week. We are absolutely entering the probably one of the busiest times for the NBA, which is NBA draft week. Not just because of the draft and because of all the new players that have come in through college and G League and overseas to teams, but also because so much trade activity is going to happen in the NBA this week. I'm here with my good friend and your good friend as well, David Weiner. You know him as Beam a Thug, both on ClutchFans and on social media, on Twitter. David, good to have you here.
Dave, I just have one question. Would you have drafted Harold Miner over Robert Horry?
Yes, absolutely would have. That is definitely an age that was the desire at that time, is go for the flashy player. And that really did not work out. So it's kind of funny. We're actually, in this draft, it's been hashed over and over again. Right now, it looks like the Rockets' choices are probably going to come down to Reed Sheppard and Donovan Clingan. I've always thought Stephon Castle would be in the mix too. We just haven't heard much about him. But so much, David, as you know, the draft is Wednesday. The second round will be Thursday. So much can happen between now and then. But at least where we're sitting right now here Monday in draft week, it sure looks like it's just going to hinge on whether Donovan Clingan goes number one or not. If Zachary Rissache goes number one, there's suddenly some drama and some interesting things that could play out for the Rockets at 3. If Donovan Clingan goes 1, it's probably going to come down to Reed or Rissache, which we have heard almost no buzz about Zachary Rissache and the Rockets. He did not work out for Houston. He worked out for Atlanta at 1. He worked out for Washington at 2, and he worked out for San Antonio at 4. But that might very well be because he believes he's a top 2 pick and San Antonio is a strong trade candidate. But for whatever reason, we've heard almost no buzz about Rissache to Houston. So that's what it looks like right now to me. Atlanta is still the team that's holding everything up. We don't know what they're going to do. What are your thoughts about the Rockets heading into the draft this Wednesday?
I mean, pretty similar to what you just said, Dave. I think as far as Alexander Sarr, whatever, again, all we know is what's out there, and a lot of teams are tight-lipped about this draft, especially given how flat it is at the top. But all indications are that Sarr's probably going to go to Washington at 2. He continues to refuse to work out for Atlanta at 1 because I think probably correctly the Sarr camp probably views Washington as a better situation. And when was the last time a top prospect thought that the Washington Wizards were the best situation? So
that is true. That is true.
So I think we can cross Sarr off the list of possibilities for the Rockets at 3. I agree with you. I think right now it's probably between Reed Sheppard and Donovan Clingan. If like the reports from Kelly Eco are true, and you hear some tricklings from people like Jake Fisher and others that indicate that those are the top 2 guys on the Rockets board. I don't know if you saw that earlier today. We're taping this on Sunday. Kevin Pelton came out with his
stats only,
his stats related draft rankings, which combine the stats only with the conventional rankings. And Reed Sheppard was clearly the number 1 analytics pick on stats only, and hence he was the number 1 overall pick on Pelton's board. He was not shy about saying how the Rockets have used analytics in the draft probably more than most teams, and have hence gotten the most value based on those models in the draft, whether Şengün, Tari Eason, being two pronounced examples that, outside the top 10. But, gun to my head, if there's no trade, it seems to be leading towards Reed Sheppard is my guess.
It does. Certainly the hype. I think I think everything up until maybe 5 or 6 days ago, before Jeremy Wu of ESPN had kind of said that there was some buzz from the Rockets that they were interested in Reed Sheppard. I think everything up to that point had been speculation. The Rockets need shooting. The Rockets focus on analytics. And Reed Sheppard shot over 52% from three-point range, a hair under 70% true shooting. So all analytical models are going to blow up for Reed Sheppard, without a doubt. I think where I kind of questioned Reed Sheppard to Houston, and where maybe it's not the home run that everyone else thought, is his size and Ime Udoka, and what does he want to build? It's the Ime factor, basically, coming in here. And if Ime's sold on Reed Sheppard, then I don't think there's any doubt that's where they would go. Donovan Clingan is the guy I thought, despite the fact that in the immediate, this team really doesn't need a center. They've got Alperen Şengün, they've got Steven Adams, they've got Jock Landale, though I would expect him to be more salary potential trade, fodder, if you will. But if they're going BPA, I really thought Clingan looked like a special prospect. Let's see if he falls to 3, and if the Rockets actually have to choose between the two players. Clingan would still be who I would guess, but I agree with you. I think right now, with what we're seeing come out of the Rockets, or just seeing at least reportedly from the Rockets, Reed Sheppard is probably a strong bet. Not to mention, we don't know what Atlanta's going to do. Donovan Clingan could go number 1, and then that might make it a lot easier for the Rockets to pick. But I'm a little surprised by it, because I felt, to be honest with you, that the top 3 early on would be in some order: Sarr, Riche, Clingan. And we could talk more about Reed and Sheppard and Clingan, but I do want to talk to you about trade down possibilities, which I would not rule out as well for the Rockets, because it feels like they might get somebody that Ime just loves at 7, 8, and then I certainly have a few names in mind. Pick up a future asset, which sort of kicks the can for them to be able to be in a position for a superstar trade later. I know a lot of teams like to say that, but the Rockets still want to be in that position. What are some of your thoughts on that? I'm sure they're strongly looking at that. It also could hinge on whether Clingan's available, who seems to be the guy that most teams are interested in moving up. Matter of fact, I'd say that's the only guy we're really hearing consistently that teams want to trade up for. What are your thoughts on trade down possibilities for the Rockets?
Well, okay, so certain trade down possibilities I have as my preferred outcome for the Rockets. Again, so much depends on how far you're trading down and how premium a future draft asset you're getting. I don't want to trade down 10 spots for a lottery protected pick. I'm not interested. Yeah. I'd rather have Reed Sheppard. Right. But at the same time, if I can come away, I'm just going to throw a couple names out there. We don't have to get into them yet. We can talk about them in more detail later. But if we're trading down a few spots and still getting a guy like Devin Carter and a premium future draft asset, I would be ecstatic with that, because the fact of the matter is we have a lot of young guys. We don't have much playing time. We have like half a rotation spot open right now, barring a trade. And we do have a nice war chest. If you combine future draft assets with young talent, we have as good a war chest as most teams.
But you would agree that's primarily young talent, right? Not the picks.
More on the young talent. Oklahoma City has more picks. San Antonio has more picks. Utah has more picks. But when you really dig down, like how many absolutely premium picks do those teams have? Not that many, probably. Sure. You have a lot of mid to late picks coming there. Maybe some late lottery picks, but when we got 6 young guys that are all, would go to the top, near the top of this draft. Plus you're adding the number 3 pick, or, depending on what we do with it. I think the Rockets are as well positioned, and national NBA guys have said this repeatedly. The Rockets are as well positioned to make a star trade as almost any team in the league. And I think, especially with this draft being relatively weak at the top, I think having a premium future asset, like a lightly protected pick in the next couple years, maybe a little further down the line, depending on how premium it is, that is lightly or unprotected is probably more important to the trajectory of this team winning a championship than any guy we get at the top of this draft. That's just my personal opinion. So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So basically to sum up, I think the Rockets are probably looking very much so to trade down. And I think the possibilities of Clingan ending up at 3, I think are quite realistic. We've heard some rumors about Atlanta and San Antonio maybe doing a swap of 1 for 4, and maybe Atlanta gets some of their draft assets back from San Antonio. And I don't know if that's for the Spurs to take Risa Shea. But there's multiple scenarios. Either Atlanta takes Risa Shea, they trade with the Spurs, and the Spurs take Risa Shea, that result in Clingan at 3. And I think if Clingan's there at 3, I agree with you, Dave, that's the guy more teams seem to want to trade up for than anyone else. And I think when the Rockets are on the clock and Clingan's still on the board, they're, I'm sure they've done their due diligence, but they're going to be fielding calls for that pick. And it has to be the right trade, but
yeah,
if they can find it, that's my preference.
And I'll say if it's Memphis at 9, it has to be more than the right trade. It better be like an extreme overpay, because I mean, I know we saw this last year. OKC traded Derek Lively in the draft to Dallas, ended up burning them in the first round of the playoffs. Both teams have a long future ahead, so I don't want to say that one playoff series made that a bad trade necessarily, but you give Donovan Clingan to the Memphis Grizzlies, that is the one gaping hole on that roster. And if if they were able to fill that by just giving up a future pick, that could spell trouble for the Rockets, especially considering the Rockets are kind of right there on the bubble. We don't know what's going to happen this offseason as far as, what teams are going to take a step back, if any. Do the Clippers lose Paul George, for example? What else could happen in the West? But Memphis is one of those teams that's trying, that if everything goes well for them, and it didn't go well for them last year, they could be right there in the playoffs again, and that makes it tough for the Rockets to get in there. So I don't want to go off too much on Memphis, but I do worry a little bit.
I'll agree with you on Memphis. I think they were without, for most or all of last season, John Morant, Brandon Clark, Marcus Smart, and Desmond Bane. And if all 4 of those guys are going to play most of next season, like, they're right back in the playoffs. So I understand, like, I would probably do it for a totally unprotected pick, and you just kind of you bet against Memphis. But if they're giving us, lottery protected, top 10 protected, I'm not wild about that to trade all the way down to 9. I think, and I'm guessing you'll agree with me, the spots that make more sense, both from where we would end up in the draft and teams that have premium future assets, I'm looking at Charlotte at 6, Portland at 7, San Antonio at 8.
And I wouldn't even rule out San Antonio at 4 if the right player. And I really felt like the Rockets getting intel on San Antonio at 4 was key. It just could decide so much, just knowing what they want. I know Kelly Iko of The Athletic had kind of mentioned some teams wanted to get ahead of San Antonio at both 4 and 8 in different spots. Of course, the Rockets can really only help right now at 3, which gets ahead of teams at 4. But, it's going to it's funny you mentioned Devin Carter's name, because I don't think anything has linked the Rockets to them, but I was going to bring him up because
he's the most Ime Udoka player in the draft.
He absolutely is. I would say Stefan Castle is as well, but Castle's probably, a couple years away. Carter's older, and he's probably more ready to play and more impactful. And I think that really does matter to Ime Udoka. And I know that the Rockets organization as well kind of felt like they were done with the whole 19-year-old, type scene. Now, don't get me wrong. They're still fine drafting a 19-year-old, putting him in the pipeline, send him down to RGV, whatever it may be. But they want to win, and they want to make, if they can take some of these assets and take a big step forward, they want to do that. I think that's going to be an overriding theme in general. This, even after the draft, is still seeking that star trade. But Devin Carter comes to mind. I think if you're, there's a home run swing, Tijan Salon, or Saloon, I think is how you say it, is interesting as well. I could see them taking a flyer on somebody like that. Cody Williams is somebody I really liked and previously. I still think he's kind of intriguing. And then, of course, Kelly Iko mentioned Dalton Connect as a guy that some people within the Rockets organization like as a possible trade down.
I'm very curious to see. I agree with you, Dave. I like Dalton Connect as well. I think he's probably the second best shooter in this draft behind Reed Sheppard, but he's got NBA size and NBA athleticism, I think. Although it's curious, Kevin Pelton's stats models projected he does not rate well in the stats models. Now, I think that had more to do with him not being very good before last year and taking a huge jump. I think that also hurt Devin Carter in the stats models. I think if they weren't, because for those that don't know, Devin Carter, his first 2 years was just meh, and he got so much better this year. He and Connect, but in Devin Carter's, I think if you were just looking at this year, Devin Carter's probably the second guy behind Reed Sheppard in the stats models.
Interesting. Certainly had a huge jump as far as 3-point shooting, and seems like a guy that a lot of contending teams were hoping to get at 18, 19, 20, and he has completely blown those projections out of the water. He's going to go in the lottery. And who knows? That could be a guy the Spurs try to pick up at 8, but I definitely have had in the back of my mind him as a target for Ime if he has the say that I think he does with the Rockets. If they trade down, pick up an asset, gives Rafael what he needs, I can see Devin Carter being that kind of guy.
I would say, gun to my head, this is the second time I've said that in this pod, but if you're saying 5 years from now, who is the player in this draft most likely to be a valuable rotation player in the NBA? I'm saying Devin Carter.
No.
I'm not saying he's the best player. I'm saying he's the most likely to pan out.
Yeah, I think he's going to be good. Yeah, how good, we'll see. Real quick on Sheppard and Clingan. I think Sheppard's exciting. I think it's if you draft Reed Sheppard, I'm on board. To me, that tells me. Same. And again, I'm saying if they do it, if they take him, I have some concerns, but if they take him, it kind of alleviates those concerns because he checks a lot of boxes. The problem is the size issue and whether Ime Udoka really wants, if he feels this guy could be part of a switching program, which is what the future is going to be for the Houston Rockets. Switching, will he be able to guard wings and that kind of stuff? Some of the blow-bys and how he's been beaten defensively at times concerns me, but this is a special shooter. There's no doubt the shooting is going to translate, and that's always in demand. And he does have a high IQ. He's made great passes. If you check out a lot of his clips, the guy can make good reads, but it's going to come down to whether he is eventually a starting caliber point guard in the league. And does he fit next to Amen Thompson or whatever you hope to build there with the backcourt? You've still got Jalen Green and Fred for the rest of this year at a minimum. That's sort of the questions that I have with him. But, shooting, I think his ability to pass, I think his toughness, overall skill set is going to be really good. I still prefer Clingan. I mean, if I had to say, I think Clingan, I know the Rockets' philosophy on centers, and I know that using the third pick of the draft seems pretty pricey for how they view centers. I think it's Clingan. They'd have to have the view that Clingan is a special prospect in that regard. And that's kind of that's kind of how I view it, is I feel like this guy, I don't think he's Rudy Gobert. I'm just saying he could have that kind of an impact on a team where he just shuts everything down in the paint, possibly down the line is better in defending in space than we think. And I'm not even concerned about his offense. I know that's been knocked around as some sort of oaf. I don't see that. I think he's going to be a good passer. I think he's going to be a guy who's going to get better as he goes offensively. But the defense is what draws me the most with him. So I just want to see the Rockets have the choice between the two. I think if they take Reed Sheppard over Clingan, great. But I want to see both of those guys available when they pick at 3.
Yeah, I'm with you on this, Dave. I'm sorry I'm agreeing with you too much. This is making me sick.
No, you're fine.
But no, I'm fine with whoever the Rockets take, really. If it's Sheppard, if it's Clingan, if it's Castle, if it's somebody else. I think they've earned our trust over the last few drafts, just their hit rate. But, again, me personally, it takes 2 to tango, but if they can move down, get a guy like Devin Carter plus a premium future asset, I think I take that over either Sheppard or Clingan. If we're talking a truly premium future asset, I think I take that outcome. I think that would be my preferred outcome.
I think there would be a lot of anger from fans, but it would be a good outcome. I kind of agree with that.
I just think those two pieces. I could see Carter as the backup point guard on a championship team, and that pick again. It has to be a really good pick, a pick that is likely to be near the top of its draft.
Yeah.
But if we can end up with something like that, that piece is so critical. If the goal is if we don't think the best player on this team is the best player when we win a championship is currently on this roster, that kind of piece is so critical towards getting that player.
Do you think there's any way to trade down to 6 or 7? And I mean, I say there is a way to trade down to 6 or 7, but do you think there's any way that Reed Sheppard could actually be available there? I think it really depends on what San Antonio's doing. I think a lot of people believe that they would just scoop him up right there, but you possibly have Castle, and what direction would they go between those two?
I mean, that's the hard. I think teams, it could be the team that's trading up with you wants Reed. I think San Antonio and Detroit and Charlotte, I think, are all three teams that desperately need shooting. So I would be shocked if we traded. You said trade down to 6 or trade down to 7?
6 or 7 is what I was wondering.
I think San Antonio and Detroit would take him because they need shooting, and Reed Sheppard's just an elite shooter. And, Detroit's similar to us. They have athletes to play around them. San Antonio, I think, was the worst shooting team in the league last year. I just would be shocked if Sheppard fell to 6.
The Charlotte thing throws me off a little bit because they do have Mark Williams, who's had a ton of injury issues, but kind of a similar build as a Clingan. He's got, I think, a 7'7" wingspan like Clingan does, and has been good when he's played. But he, like I said, he's had a bunch of injury issues, hasn't produced a ton as a result of that, just in the volume. But what kind of is it? Just future picks that interest you in any kind of trade down? Are there any players out of that group like Mark Williams? I don't know if that's too rich to give up Mark Williams to go from 6 to 3, or
I mean, all our indications are that Charlotte is not trading Mark Williams.
Yeah,
so,
that's
if
right.
They were, I'd be very interested. I think he's, I would say Clingan's probably a better prospect, but I love Mark Williams coming out in the draft. It
just makes you wonder, though, who Charlotte would be going for at 3, if not Clingan.
I think they'd be going for Sheppard.
Okay, well, that would be interesting. That would be the first report I've heard of somebody trading up for or wanting to trade up for Sheppard. I mean, I know you're not reporting that. I'm just saying you're suspecting.
I just would be shocked if San Antonio, he's not, it's probably Reza Shea and Sheppard at the top of their board is my guess.
Sure. That's totally fine. As far as anything else, that's just what I think it's going to come down to. Whether Clingan goes 1, I have a hard time seeing Quinn Snyder pass on him, but how much say does he have in this whole thing? And is Reza Shea, who I think a lot, outside of Jonathan Givony, a lot of draft analysts have kind of questioned Reza Shea and how, he should be this high. But, I'll give credit to Jonathan Givony. He has been consistent that this guy's number 1 or 2. He's always been up there for him. I trust Givony in the sense that I think he is talking to teams, he's talking to agents, and that's the lay of the land. I don't think he's going out on his own and saying, hey, I've assessed this guy and I think he should be number 1. I think he's talking to people and knows that's the market for him. So Atlanta, if they're really considering between those two, great. I think we should all want Reza Shea to go number 1. Then you've got options and you let the Rockets choose from there. But that's where.
So you were asking about like what do I have in mind, like about as far as picks go. So let's talk very briefly about Charlotte at 6, Portland at 7, San Antonio at 8. I think each of those teams could offer something premium. So for Charlotte, I'm thinking they owe a lottery protected pick to San Antonio next year, but if it doesn't convey next year, it immediately turns to second rounders. So okay. I want the lottery, the protected lottery portion. I want that pick. If they want protect, I might be willing to top 4 protect it. So if it's 5 to 14, we get the pick, and if not, it rolls over to, like, unprotected the next year or the year after.
That's rich.
That's
to move
the
up 3 spots in this draft.
Exactly. That's so to give you some perspective, the Luka Trae Young trade in 2018, Atlanta traded the number 3 pick, which became Luka Doncic, for the number 5 pick, Trae Young, and then I believe it was a top 5 protected pick the next year, and that was just from 3 to 5.
I think it became Cam Reddish, right?
It became Cam Reddish. I think he was the 10th pick the next year.
Okay.
But I think it was only top 5 protected. So the trade itself was 3 for 5 and a top 5 protected pick the next year. So I don't think it's wholly unreasonable if you're trading from 3 to 6 to ask for a top 4 protected pick the next year. I mean, maybe the Rockets just couldn't get that, but that's what I'd be asking for if I'm Rafael. And if Charlotte's like, oh, we'll give you a lottery protected pick in 2027, I'm hanging up the phone. So that's Charlotte. And feel free to chime in if you have thoughts on those particular types of assets. Portland at 7, unfortunately they have a lottery protected pick to Chicago that rolls over for several years. But what this is a combination of picks, and I threw this out on Twitter a couple days ago. In 2029, I know that seems like forever from now, but keep in mind that this is we're looking long range here. We're trying to build a championship team. In 2029, Portland has its own pick, Milwaukee's pick, and Boston's pick, all unprotected. While it's a little further out than I'd like, if I'm Rafael, I'll say I'll give you 3 for 7, but I want the best of those 3 picks in 2029, unprotected. Now, we think Boston's going to be great forever, but all good things come to an end. Portland's probably going to get better over the years, but man, I'll tell you what, I would be surprised if Milwaukee was still good in 2029. There's a decent chance Milwaukee's going to suck.
Oh, but we're talking about 5 years out. I don't care what 3 franchises you pick right now. I'll take the best of 3 franchises in the NBA from 5 years out. Yeah, that's an expensive price.
I don't know if Portland would do it. I threw it out on Twitter, and I think the majority of people either would take it or wanted just a little bit more. I don't think you're going to get more than that, but I think only 20% of people that I polled said absolutely not. I'm telling you what, if they could get that, they'd do that trade. That's the kind of pick I'm looking for. And then for San Antonio, they could potentially have 3 lottery picks next year.
They are rich. Yes, I agree.
They have Atlanta's unprotected pick.
That team is coming, by the way, guys. Not just because of Wemby. I think they are on the way. If they end up hitting with these 2 picks, they've got a lot more coming, and players want to come to San Antonio to play with Wemby just because he is generational. That's going to be a problem. So Rockets are going to have to be quite aggressive.
Yeah, I'm not looking for a future Spurs pick. I mean, maybe next year's Spurs pick, but beyond that, I'm guessing, 5 years out, the Spurs pick's not going to be very good. But the Spurs own other teams' picks. Yeah. They have several other teams' picks. And if you can get like Atlanta's unprotected pick next year, or if even better, the better of San Antonio's or Atlanta's pick, unprotected next year, like that could be Cooper Flagg. That could be the number 1 or number 2 pick next year.
Yeah, I have a hard time thinking anybody would give up an unprotected 25. You know what I'm saying? I think it's just because of the Cooper Flagg aspect. I just think everyone at a minimum top 1 protection.
Right. This is what I'm talking 3 for 8, not 3 for 4. And I'll guarantee you, Rafael's had these conversations already, and someone's hung up the phone on somebody else. But these are the types of assets I'm looking at. Like we like to think, number three, the 3rd pick of the draft. Well, it's not all 3rd picks are created equal, but if I'm Rafael, these are the types of assets I'm asking for. You may not get them, but all it takes is one team to say yes. And teams could be saying no right now, but on Wednesday night, if Clingan or whoever the team really wants to move up for, if that guy's there and the Rockets are on the clock, does that no become a yes?
Yeah,
that's
the
what I'm hoping for. And
it's all, like you said, as you mentioned, it's all based on if their guy is there. Of course, any team that moves back has no guarantees, and it could the trade also could be contingent upon the Rockets guy being there at 7, 8, or 9 or wherever they move to, and the Rockets are content with drafting that target outright, and then they can see how that plays out.
I think there's only 8 or 9 guys I really like in this draft, and then after that, there's guys I like but not as much, and you might as well have the 19th pick than the 15th pick for all I care.
Yeah. By the way, Paul George, this mysterious stuff going on with Paul George right now where, there's some buzz about him possibly opting in. I do think the Rockets would be behind a little bit in the line. The Rockets will absolutely try for these things. If KD does this, if Paul George does this.
Last time a Clipper star decided to opt into his contract and negotiate a trade to another team. What happened? What happened then?
I think he ended up a Houston Rocket.
I think it was Chris Paul who did that. So,
who interestingly enough may end up back with the Clippers this summer. But yeah, I tend to think other teams like the Knicks, which get mentioned, heck, even OKC, if they really wanted to get aggressive. There probably will be some other teams, but the Rockets are going to be aggressive on exactly this type of thing. If Paul George wants to be here, the Rockets will try to make something happen. And that's when you have to look at the core 6 and say, you might see one of those guys get moved. It's possible. So keep an eye out for that in general this summer. I'm just making that a consistent theme. That's what they've wanted to do. I remember back in the trade deadline where Tim McMahon talked about this and said as far as the Jalen and Şengün stuff and saying, hey, the Rockets still are looking to make a significant upgrade. And they got trashed a lot for that, or he did, I should say. And he was right. That is exactly what the Rockets are going to be trying to do. Now, whether they'll be successful or not, that's anybody's guess. But they're going to get involved if any of these names come on the block this summer. So watch for that as far as, how it ties into this draft as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so many players of that caliber that, you got to jump on it when the scenario presents itself. But it's just those are few and far between. I mean, we love the core 6. We think they're great, and you don't want to trade them for, some rando out there. But if a real star becomes, available, we can't be too precious. We can't be too precious.
Absolutely. And just some other, house cleaning type stuff. I will say, as far as Clingan, if he doesn't end up with the Rockets, I do hope he ends up with the Hawks, because we do need that team to be better than Brooklyn next year. That's a key thing, especially with Chicago possibly on the door of a rebuild and bowing out, which is kind of a little bit concerning for the Rockets. And also keep an eye that we mentioned Paul George of the Clippers, just the Clippers, Lakers, Suns, those teams, Warriors as well, the ones that are older and have to make a move forward or are just going to decay and crumble here at some point. Those are the ones that are really kind of keeping the Rockets from, being in the playoffs right now. And the Rockets have to, on their own pass them, but keep an eye on those 4 teams in the West this summer to see what actually happens with them. The draft. We really haven't even talked about pick number 44, which I know is kind of an afterthought for most Rockets fans, but not for you, David. I know that's the most important pick. Yeah.
I know second round pick guy around the way. He's real excited about it.
I'd say you would probably throw in the third pick to move from 44 to 31, right? To get at the top of the second round. That
I have to think longer. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I mean, is there anybody? Jamal Shedd's a guy I'm intrigued by. I have to admit, I know he's a local guy. Adem Bona is another guy I think I'm really interested, kind of curious about. Isaiah Crawford. Those are a few guys I think that I don't know if they'll end up being there at 44, but those could be interesting. That's also a possible trade chip. It could just be traded for a future second rounder. But there are a few guys that the Rockets might find a hidden gem there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very intrigued to see what the Rockets do at 44. They obviously, given the number of young players they're bringing back, especially if they keep the pick, I would be very surprised if they traded out of the draft, out of the first round completely. So they're going to be adding a first round pick. If they're bringing back the non guaranteed team option guys, Tate, Jeff Green, Londale, to even just to keep them a salary filler for a big trade, there's not many roster spots left. And it's possible, we always say best player available, BPA. It's possible the Rockets may look to trade the pick, trade for a future pick, kick the can, get hopefully multiple future second round picks. Or if they use the pick, they may be looking for a stash pick. A guy like Juan Nunez is a 6'4" point guard who I believe is gonna run point for Real Madrid next year. And Dave, you know how I like Real Madrid point guards.
Absolutely. I mean, if we could just talk about that guy for 15 years about bringing him over, it'd be fantastic. We need that Ewell replacement.
Yeah. So, a guy like Nunez, someone to be stashed overseas with, first round talent that we can maybe bring over in a couple of years. Or they may look, and this has become increasingly more prevalent in the NBA over the last few years, is maybe not getting the best player available, willing to sign a two-way contract. A lot of guys, especially in the second half of the second round, we're right there in the middle of the second round. You see a lot of guys that, like Austin Reeves a few years ago, there was a reason he wasn't drafted. I personally had an early second round grade on Austin Reeves. The reason he wasn't drafted is he told teams, I'm not signing a two-way contract. And if he was willing to do that, he would have been picked in the second round for sure. A lot of guys, you will see guys get drafted in the second round that are not as good as guys that are undrafted, because there's going to be those guys that, unless you're a very early second rounder, if you refuse to sign a two-way contract, you may just go undrafted. So the Rockets may be looking like, who's the best guy on our board who said he's willing to sign a two-way contract? And that may be who we may be a little underwhelmed with who they take for that reason. It wouldn't surprise me, just again, given the fact that there's a scarcity of roster spots and they're going to want to use those very few open roster spots on veterans.
It's interesting because you got me thinking about the Rockets' depth, which they have quite a bit, right? I mean, there's no doubt about that. Even at pick number 3, it's going to be a problem no matter who you draft. It's going to create competition, and somebody's development capital may go down a little bit, just the way it is. Şengün, Jabari, Jalen, doesn't matter. Somebody could lose a little bit of luster because you've drafted some other prospect, or that person may not get as much shine. I think when you look at pick 44, it just makes it tough. As a matter of fact, I've heard that the Rockets being kind of stacked as far as their depth, not so much like star laden or anything like that, but just really good players, has made it hard to get players into work out up for the number 3 pick. They obviously didn't have Sara Risache, which they could have the number 2. And even though it's been reported about Clingan, I'm hearing they didn't get Clingan in. They got Sheppard in, but no Clingan. So I don't know.
Clingan's represented by the same agent as Şengün, right?
Yeah, that's a big thing too, because just in general, I think we mentioned this before, but it's Sean Kennedy who's his agent, and Sean Kennedy, if he's just doing his job, is not going to want to put 2 of his better clients, who both are viewed as starting centers, that his ultimate goal is to get max contracts for both, whether that's realistic or not. To have them both on the same team is a problem. So if Clingan's actually drafted here, they're going to have to figure something out, with him, just what ultimately their future is, because, in Şengün's case, he's possibly this summer, but more likely a year from now is looking at a big payday. And then, you've got the Clingan thing. So that is something to keep an eye on as well. The Rockets say it does not play a role. I mean, there is no doubt that's something that they'd have to discuss at a minimum if they did actually pull the trigger and draft down in Clingan. But The overall point, though, is it's going to be tough, like as you mentioned, for any player they get to crack this rotation. Yeah, and I'm not expecting the 44th pick of the draft to crack the Rockets rotation. I should be more clear, but I mean, just being up with the big team and, getting those kind of minutes, like you said, a two-way contract is probably going to be more attractive to them.
Yep. No, exactly. I mean, trust me, I have probably 24 guys I'd be interested in at 44, but there's a decent chance that at least half of those guys are not going to want to sign two-way contracts. So, I don't know if that pushes them off the board. I saw the Rockets have worked out a whole bunch of guys, but that are probably going to either be candidates at 44 or undrafted free agents. Guys are going to look to sign to two-way contracts or Exhibit 10 deals. But maybe there's someone they have a first-round grade on that falls all the way to 44, and they just suck it up and say, here's the 15th roster spot. We're going to give that to this guy.
Okay, so Bronny James, that's ultimately what you're saying at 44.
No thanks. And by the way, I'm not as down on Bronny James as most people. I think we got to take his season with a huge grain of salt, given the cardiac arrest.
For sure,
incident.
for sure.
If that had not happened, I am guessing he would have had a much, much, much more productive year in college. And I don't see him becoming a star or anything like that, but I wouldn't write him off as completely unworthy of being in the NBA.
Oh, I'm with you. Absolutely. Free agency. This is, to me, kind of a question mark. We've heard names, Malik Beasley, Gary Harris, that kind of thing, maybe some shooters that are brought in. Take me through this real quickly, because the Rockets do have on the horizon the 25 cap space, which, if they don't pick up the option for Fred VanVleet and, they don't extend Şengün until next summer. And, who knows what can end up actually happening with Jalen's extension. It's a little bit more tricky for him because his cap hold is so large. But the whole point is, on the horizon, you've got this cap space thing. So if the Rockets are going to dip into the MLE this summer, take me through how that works.
So I'm guessing if you're the Rockets front office, you're probably looking, if your goal is get the best player you can with the mid-level exception, the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is going to be just a little bit shy of $13 million next year. I am guessing they will offer most or all of it to a good free agent, probably a veteran shooter. But they'll probably want to structure it, okay, you get the full mid-level in year one, and the second year is a team option or non-guaranteed. Something similar to what they did with Jeff Green this past year, where he got clearly overpaid on purpose using the Rockets cap room, and they gave him interestingly, a team option that is also non-guaranteed for 2 weeks. I think they'd look to do something similar with a guy like a Gary Harris or a Malik Beasley or someone like that you mentioned. If someone surprisingly that maybe is another tier up from that is willing to sign for the mid-level, and it's a caliber of player that it's
not going to take a 1 year deal. Yeah.
Right.
The caliber of player that won't take a 1 year.
Yeah, it won't take a 1 year deal and is viewed around the league as more valuable than the non-taxpayer mid-level amount. I could see the Rockets giving 3 or even 4 years to that guy, as long as you knew, this was a movable contract. So
I see. Okay. So in other words,
I know Malik Monk just re-signed with Sacramento, but hypothetically speaking, a Malik Monk caliber player said, I'll come to the Rockets for the MLE. I think they would still jump at that, and knowing that, look, if we had to create cap room, we could move this guy.
Yeah. Into somebody else's cap space.
Yeah, into someone else's cap room or for trade exception or something like that.
Okay.
Because another thing to remember is, starting this offseason for the first time ever, you can use the mid-level exception as a trade exception. So even if you use the full mid-level on a guy and it doesn't work out, you can trade him to another team that didn't use their non-taxpayer mid-level exception and trade him right into the other team's MLE.
So that basically means just about every most teams, I should say, will have that kind of exception available to. Okay, that makes it interesting. That kind of answers my. I was giving you the softball pitch to say, yeah, if they give a 3-year deal to somebody, then yeah, now they can extend Şengün and Jalen, and cap space dream is dead.
Well, I will say this: that optionality. The Rockets always want optionality, and right now they have tremendous optionality. Especially given that Van Vliet's third year is a team option. That was key. But at the end of the day, this is all going to hinge on Jalen. If they re-sign Jalen Green, kiss cap room goodbye. Because it's. I mean, maybe they could have enough to sign a really like a Malik Monk type of player in 2025. But I would probably see them more likely to bring back Van Vliet for more years at a lower annual salary, and then use the non-taxpayer mid-level, and then keep Jalen and keep Şengün. But again, like you said, Jalen. Again, this is not hate on Şengün. It is literally because Şengün's contract is structured because he was the 16th pick and not the second pick. He gives the Rockets more optionality because he will have a lower cap hold, just like Tyrese Maxey with Philadelphia this past season. He did not sign an extension on purpose so that Philly would have all this cap room this summer before they re-signed him. Not as great as Maxey because he was the 21st pick, but Şengün is the 16th pick. It's a similar thing. They can wait. He's only got like a $16 million cap hold. Unfortunately, Jalen's cap hold is over $30 million because he was the second pick. So whatever they do with Jalen is most likely going to determine whether we have any chance at cap room night.
Interesting. Yeah, so as far as the free agency, I don't expect them to be big players. I do expect, like you said, they could go for somebody who could help a smaller player, but I do think trade-wise, we're getting to that point where the consolidation trade has to happen. At least I would think over the next year, it has to occur. I wouldn't be surprised if something in some form or fashion happens this summer. But that is all contingent upon who becomes available. Donovan Mitchell, they've had interest in Zion Williamson for a long time, but it does not look like he's going on the block. Paul George, Kevin Durant, believe it or not, if he gets, if he becomes available, something happens, shakes loose with Phoenix, the Rockets will be interested. And that's just something I would keep in mind regardless. And, I don't say this to disrespect any of the core 6 guys. They're high on all 6 of them, but any of them could be moved. That's just the reality of the situation if the right star becomes available. So, but we're hearing
this team is going to get really expensive real quick if they give, max or near max contracts to Jalen and Şengün, and that's what those 2 players are going to ask for. Mm-hmm. If you have those guys on max or near max contracts, with Jabari and Tari coming up the next year, and Amen and Cam coming up the year after that, and the third pick coming up the year after that, this team's going to get too expensive too quick. Forget about trading for a star because you're not going to be able to afford to have all those players. You're talking second apron level pretty quick once you start handing out 3 max contracts.
Yeah. And, shout out to the Rockets front office. I think they've done overall a good job with the draft. They've drafted a lot of good guys, but this is where it's going to get tough. They did a great job getting this team from 22 wins to 41 with the Ime Udoka hire and, the veteran additions they made in the offseason. All kudos to them, but this is going to be the difficult part where somebody that is beloved in the fan base, and all 6 of these guys probably are, might have to be dealt for the betterment of the team long term. But we'll see how that happens. What happens there. But I would be shocked if you do not hear the Rockets involved in trade rumors when some big names come up this summer. I'm talking about this summer. So
for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, and David, anything you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I'm sure you and I'll be back. After doing 2 of these things in a year, I'm sure we'll be back after the draft to recap and maybe go deeper dive into free agency.
This is shocking. This is like twice in maybe a month span. I don't know what it's been, but
I'm already sick of you.
Exactly. So thank you, David. Appreciate you coming on, and thank everybody for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening from, and have a great one.